The antiseptic bit into my split skin, metallic on my tongue beneath the oxygen tubing, and the fluorescent ER lights carved hard lines across the ceiling. My name is Natalie Pierce, 31, and tonight I did not know if I would see morning. The doctor said multiple rib fractures, possible internal bleeding, and my breath came like a coin I had to pay for each second. Every inhale scraped my chest as if a hand pressed on broken bone, while the monitor kept a rhythm my pulse refused to follow. I tried to lift my right arm and found dead weight and a hot flare that moved through bone like lightning trapped under skin. Beyond the curtain, a gurney wheel squealed and someone called for hands, and my world narrowed to the rail and the copper taste I could not swallow. I pressed my cracked phone with the only hand that listened and reached the house I had helped pay for. My mother answered with practiced calm and told me not to make this worse because my sister was fragile and she did not ask which hospital or whether I could breathe. I called my father and met an old sigh that felt like a door closing, and he told me to stop exaggerating because I had always been dramatic about her. A nurse adjusted the mask and asked who would be coming, and I heard my own answer fall without cushioning. Probably no one. The room answered for them. The ceiling seemed lower, and the lights turned brighter, and every angle cut like glass while the seconds stood on edge. When I closed my eyes, I saw the wooden chair arc through a kitchen that smelled of lemon cleaner, and panic heard ribs give like dry twigs under a boot, felt the tile take my face while air fled the room. Breath became a bargain I could not afford, and thought became a scatter of white sparks that would not gather into a plan. The nurse kept my line clear, the machine kept its tick, and I held the sheet as if the fabric could anchor me to the earth. I opened my eyes to the screen where images would soon print the truth in light and shadow because X-rays do not argue. The ER kept my pulse. The X-rays would speak. My family would not. After the scan, the tech slid me back under the fluorescent grid, the gurney bump sending a bolt through my ribs. I watched the clock above the curtain and pretended naming minutes could keep the dark from widening. I am still in the ER. I told myself hurt in ways a picture can count. The resident kept to facts. The nurse charted pain while the IV whispered. Leah stepped close and asked who should be called, and the answer arrived as if someone else spoke. My mother will not come, I said. My father will not either. Leah did not look surprised. She tightened the mask strap and wrote her name larger on my whiteboard. The message light blinked. My mother texted, "Do not involve the police, your sister is not well." My father left a voicemail telling me to calm down, saying hospitals overreact when families fight. The room did not debate them. Machines did their math, and the night moved forward. I thought about the house with my name on the mortgage and how its door swings wider for my sister, and I thought about the chair that chose bone over wood. I told Leah my name and age again, as if identity could be an anchor, and she said, "Breathe with me," then counted 4 slow beats. The air landed shallow, but it landed, and panic slid to the fringe of the curtain. In the pause, I did an inventory the way I do for patients. Right arm, no lift. Chest sharp with each inhale. Phone cracked but working. Family absent by choice. A code was called and running feet blurred past, and the wall clock lifted 2 minutes without asking me. If there is a word for the quiet that fills a room when love refuses to walk in, it did not arrive. Leah touched the rail and said, "I can sit here until imaging closes," and I decided that counted as someone. They call me dramatic when I warn about storms, but the forecast tonight is simple. It will be the X-rays versus their opinion, the record versus their story, truth pressed into film, versus the fragile excuse they prefer. I pictured printouts cooling on a tray, black and white and unarguable, and let a small thought form. I will not leave this building believing I owe silence to anyone. After radiology paged the resident back, the curtain slid aside, and the room took on the hard brightness that makes everything look cleaner than it feels. The attending pressed along my ribs and listened while I took rationed breaths, then spoke in phrases I could file like labels. Multiple rib fractures on the right, contusions across the lower thorax, probable ulnar fracture concussion symptoms to monitor serial vitals pain control. I watched the clock nudge forward and kept my mind from returning to the kitchen, to the chair, to the sound of bone giving. The oxygen mask warmed my lips and fogged at the edges. The IV pump hissed and clicked in a small rhythm that argued for order. Leah checked the name band and the dosage and asked again about contacts. I told her my parents were at home with my sister and that home is not a place that sends help. She wrote adult protective considerations in the corner of the sheet and did not make it a threat, only a path if I wanted one. Another nurse changed the bedding beneath my shoulder with choreography that never wakes the whole body at once. I pictured my ribs in gray bars, my arm in a white fracture line, my skull shadowed but intact, and I felt a loyalty shift inside me toward proof. I have spent years negotiating with feelings that rewrite the day, but a picture taken under light refuses to lie on command. The resident returned with a tablet and showed me the first images. He traced the margins and said here, and I understood the plan without asking to be brave about it. Wrap, sling, analgesia, repeat neurochecks, consider observation through the night. He asked how the injury happened. I said my sister swung a chair and then she kept kicking. He waited and I added that my parents hugged her upstairs while the neighbor called for help. His face did not become surprise or pity. It settled into work. Leah squeezed my hand once and said we will keep you safe here, and the words landed where the pain had left room for them. The machines kept time. The images kept the story. I kept breathing because the film had already learned my name. The chart printer hummed behind the desk. Pain ebbed, then surged a tide against bone. I let the tablet rest on my lap and counted 4 slow breaths with Leah. Outside, sirens thinned toward downtown. After the ER would not let me move except to breathe, memory moved for me, pulling me backward into rooms that smelled like disappointment. I was 8 when the lights went out on a party with my name in frosting. Balloons mapped the ceiling cake. Weighted candles stood like small soldiers. Victoria lost musical chairs and detonated into sobs. Mom whispered, "We must protect her peace." Guests were ushered out. The wind blew out my candles. Dad rocked Victoria upstairs and repeated "sweetheart" until it meant nothing. I learned that silence was a present I was expected to give. At 12, I tuned a school violin in a gym that smelled of varnish. 2 empty places marked where my parents promised to sit. They left to calm Victoria after she misplaced her wallet. I played to echo and clapped for myself. At 15, I came home with a silver medal while Victoria failed math. Mom told her grades do not define brilliance. Dad told me nice job without looking up. I filed the medal in cedar and kept my voice flat so it would not be called dramatic. By 18, the script hardened. Victoria called bosses abusive and rooms toxic, and the house turned into a revolving door. I left for college, stacked shifts, and limped a dying laptop. Dad sent me a classifieds link. A week later, Victoria said her keyboard lagged and a boxed MacBook arrived. Mom said your sister's emotional health depends on her tools and you can handle more. At 24, Dad asked me to co-sign the refinance because I was responsible and the bank liked my numbers. I signed. Each year, I paid half the property tax and more when kindness overdrafted. Independence became a service without days off. Christmas proved the lesson. I knitted scarves with sore fingers. Victoria handed IOUs on scraps and they cried at her creativity. My scarves were folded away with tissue still crisp. At 25, I cooked pasta in the apartment 2 jobs afforded. Victoria stormed out mid-dinner. My parents followed to comfort her while the candle burned alone. I blew it out because the flame looked tired. By 27, I understood strong was another word for invisible. If the sink clogged, I fixed it. If a dog needed shots, I scheduled them. If escrow hiccuped, I sat on hold so Dad would not have to. Victoria's crises arrived like weather alerts. I was the sandbag at the door. When she crashed another job, they called it a healing season and asked me to transfer extra for groceries. I said yes because I had been trained to keep storms quiet. I dated a man who liked strength until he learned it meant I swallowed sound. He wanted lifting without weight. I left before silence smothered me. Years stacked like boxes labeled with my usefulness. Victoria collected diagnoses like charms and wielded sensitive and gifted until they meant exempt. When bills ran late, I paid them. When she broke a lease, Dad co-signed another and called me to celebrate her bravery. Mom texted, "Remember, she is fragile." I sent money and called it peace. In summer, the roof leaked above the kitchen light. I climbed a ladder with a flashlight while thunder shook the window. Victoria filmed lightning for her feed. Dad later texted thanks with a single period, the grammatical shrug I kept like proof we were real. The thing about being reliable is that people stop seeing the work and only see the absence when you put the tools down. When Victoria scraped a fender, Dad announced the world is hard for a spirit like hers. Mom ordered her a spa ride to reset. I patched the fender with a kit that stained my hands with solvent and warning. On a Wednesday in late winter, Mom called. "Victoria is not doing well. Could you bring groceries? You always know how to calm her." The phrase opened the door like a password. I bought broth and bread and things that heat quickly. The house smelled of lemon cleaner the way it does after a mess you want gone. Victoria paced barefoot, eyes bright with the shine that comes before a storm. The recruiter forgot her genius. The boyfriend did not understand art. The city was cruel to the gifted. I warmed soup. The microwave beeped like a gavel. "Eat first, then make a plan," I said. "She heard you are small and I am not." She lifted a chair. I still thought she would put it down. Instead, she swung. I remember sound before pain, a wooden crack that corrected my beliefs about family. The floor met me and held me. Air fled, metal and lemon on my tongue. Somewhere, footsteps approached and climbed the stairs. Later, I learned my parents spoke to Victoria in the bedroom, calling her sweetheart and telling her it is not your fault. I tried to lift my arm and learned it could not raise my cheek. A neighbor's voice at the door, then a radio replied, and unfamiliar hands lifted me with competence that did not need history. I rode to the ER and decided that maybe being seen was just another word for being counted. Later, there would be scans and charts and a folder named evidence. Before all of that, there was a house full of familiar furniture and not one place left to sit. Responsibility had always felt to me like a quiet savings account, but in our house, it became a line of credit everyone else could draw from. The refinance began with Dad's practical voice. A small favor to keep the bank happy. "Just your signature, we will never need it." I signed because daughter felt like a contract I could not edit. The first tax bill after that arrived heavy and late. Dad forwarded a screenshot and asked if I could cover it until bonus time. I covered it. When escrow bumped the payment, Mom said the lender was confused and the family would fix it next quarter. I fixed it that night with a transfer and a knot that decided to stay. Responsibility stopped being a virtue and turned into plumbing. If I did not keep moving, water rose. Victoria learned the valves by instinct. Her messages arrived with emergency in the subject line and lists beneath it: rent, utilities, car, the numbers falling like stones I was expected to carry. Dad called her sensitive and called me solid, and solid meant footing they poured every time her foundation cracked. When my own radiator failed in winter, I layered blankets and took the bus, then sent Victoria grocery money because she had a big week emotionally. Mom thanked me with sentences that praised my strength and ended with a request. The requests were small until they were not. "Could you look over this lease for your sister just to be safe? Could you add your name for a few months so she can be approved? Could you switch the electric bill back to the house so collection letters stop making her anxious?" I watched the ledger grow larger and more impersonal, and still they said, "Family is not about counting." But the math counted me each line, proving reliability could be harvested like grain. At work, I told patients to ask for help before pain becomes crisis. At home, I swallowed and called it grace. On the day I paid half the roof repair, I received a photo of Victoria at a gallery opening captioned "Energy Restored." Dad forwarded a link about resilience and added, "See your support matters." I replied with a receipt for shingles and a silence that tried not to ache. When I suggested unwinding the cosign, Mom said lenders hate changes and it would upset your sister. Dad used the word obligation as if it were a blessing. I felt the house tighten around my name like a belt no one else noticed. Even holidays became transactions. I brought food and filled tanks. Victoria brought apologies shaped like poems about her sensitivity, and my parents framed them beside the fireplace. One spring afternoon, the county sent a notice about unpaid assessments, and Dad forwarded it to me with 3 words: "Can you handle?" I handled it. That evening, Victoria posted a video about choosing ease over struggle. I scrolled through comments praising her courage and closed. The call from my mother came just after dusk, when the sky still held a bruised ribbon of light and the street outside my apartment began to trade families for sirens. Victoria is not doing well, she said, the way some people mention the weather, and then the familiar request arrived, as if read from a card we all knew by heart. Could you stop by with groceries? You always know how to calm her. I packed broth crackers, ginger tea fruit, the kind of things you can hold when your hands shake, and I drove across town toward the house that carried my name like a liability. The porch light was on the curtains corrected into place, and the living room had been scrubbed into a picture that wanted to be believed. In the kitchen, the smell of lemon cleaner barely covered a sour tang I recognized from nights when apologies came before any admission of harm. I set the bag down and listened for a human sound that was not performance. The microwave clock blinked 12 suzzard reset after something had tripped the world. Footsteps moved in short loops down the hall and back each pass a little faster. Victoria appeared barefoot, hair damp in dark ropes that stuck to her cheeks, eyes bright with the frantic light that precedes weather warnings. "He ghosted me," she said, "and then the recruiter never called and the city punishes people who feel too much." She slammed a spoon on the counter and it ricocheted into the sink. I kept my voice level and practical, the tone that used to keep blood pressure stable at 3 in the morning. "I brought soup," I said. "Eat first so your hands stop shaking. Then we can call the recruiter together and write out what you want to say." Her head snapped like a door on a spring. "You think I am weak?" She said every word clipped as if it cut her on the way out. "You think you are better because you can pretend not to feel." I shook my head and lifted both hands' palms open in a gesture I hoped read as peace. "I think you are exhausted and hungry, and the day has been cruel." The microwave beeped and the sound cracked the room in half. I reached for a bowl and felt the air change pressure like a storm front entering through a cracked window. Victoria followed me into the space between stove and sink too close, the sour smell of adrenaline rising, sharper than the lemon. "You talk to me like I am a chart," she said, "like I am a problem you can treat and discharge like I am small." My body measured the gaps and angles the way it always does in houses where someone has practiced throwing fits. There was a chair at the end of the island, a heavy wooden one with a scar along the top rail from the time Dad bumped it into the door jamb and said nothing, stays perfect, and I thought only of moving it aside to make the walkway clear. I did not reach for it. I picked up the bowl and carried it to the microwave, and my breath came in thin slices while the soup turned and turned behind the glass. "Eat first," I said again. Not because soup cures a life, but because sometimes warmth slows the story long enough for a new page to be written. She stared at the rotating light as if it mocked her. "You always think you know the page we are on," she said, and then she stepped sideways and blocked the path between me and the counter. The timer ticked down the last 10 seconds in a sound that reminded me of a monitor that is counting a heart it does not love. I reached to open the door, and the beep landed in the middle of us like a dare. I set the bowl on the island and tried to pass her a spoon. She did not take it. She looked at the chair instead, and something in her face slid into place the way a bolt locks a gate. I felt the hairs rise along my arms in a prickling map that said the weather had arrived. I kept my hands visible and my voice soft, and I thought, if I can give the air a place to settle, no one has to bleed. Outside, a car door shut and a dog barked twice and fell quiet, and inside the house, the lemon smell thickened until it felt like a coat you could not take off. Victoria planted her feet and lifted her chin. "Say it," she demanded. "Say you think you are better." I told her I wanted her to eat and to breathe and to sleep. She smiled, and it was the kind that leaves no light behind. "It will not help," she said, and her eyes moved to the wooden chair. The chair rose in her hands, and for a beat the house held its breath. Then it came down across my right side with a hollow crack that folded sound into pain. Ribs that had been tight became a hive of heat, and the counter slipped from under my palm as I staggered the bowl, skidding and laying a stripe of soup across the tile. My forearm lifted to guard my face, and the next hit caught bone again, a flat shock that traveled to my shoulder and turned my fingers useless. Victoria did not pause to see what she had made. She reset her grip breath quick and eyes bright with a grievance older than the day, and swung until the wooden back splintered and a paint flake drifted down like a slow confession. I tried words small enough to fit through a closing door, asking her to stop, but the floor took my sentence and the air cut out. I curled because there was no position that did not hurt, and pressed my cheek to tile that smelled of lemon and metal and meals never eaten in peace. Her foot drove into my ribs, and breath jumped out in a sound I did not recognize. Another kick followed, the kind someone uses when they have found a switch and cannot resist flipping it again. "You make me feel small," she said, stamping the verdict she had written for me since childhood. I pulled toward the hallway where the light was softer and a phone might wait, but my arm would not bear weight, and my chest seized with each inch. She stepped to pin me in the island shadow, and I saw a chair leg roll under the cabinet like a bone. My body counted distances because numbers are a kind of mercy. Doorway, 6 feet, phone 8, stairs 10, and stairs felt like a mountain. My hand found the cracked phone and smeared the screen red enough to wake it. It lit to a reflection I did not want, and a list of names that had never learned how to answer when it counted. I pressed emergency, and the chime rang too bright for a kitchen. Victoria nudged the phone with her toe, far enough that I had to reach across a rib that refused to stretch. A knock at the front door broke the loop, and our neighbor called hello in a voice that tried not to trespass. Victoria hissed about privacy, and I hooked the phone back with my fingertips. The door opened on Mrs. Bennet, and the air changed the way it does when weather finally breaks. She saw me on the floor and called an ambulance with the tone of someone who has raised children. Victoria said accident and overreacting and not herself, and nothing matched the skid of the bowl. Mrs. Bennet knelt near without touching the injuries and placed a towel where I could blot without moving more than a fraction. She asked my name and the time and whether I could feel my fingers, and I answered around the edges of pain. Upstairs, the door opened, and my parents arrived, their coats rustling, their voices tuned to the loudest person in any room. They went past the kitchen and up, and Sweetheart floated down the stairwell like a ribbon from a ceremony I was never asked to attend. The neighbor called that I was on the floor and needed help, and my father said we have it handled in a tone meant for closing meetings. A siren grew from a thread to a rope, and Victoria backed toward the stairs as if she needed catching. Mrs. Bennet stayed and counted breaths and told me we were almost through the worst of the waiting. When the EMTs reached us, the room reorganized around their competence. They asked what happened, and I gave the shortest truth I could carry. My sister swung a chair, and then she kept kicking. They looked at my side and arm and the swelling at my temple and the way my breath came in small sections, and one said, "We will help you sit up on 3, and on 3, the world narrowed but held." The gurney straps cinched like calm hands, and the ceiling turned from smear to path. As we rolled out, I saw the staircase shadows and the outline of my parents gathered around Victoria like a shelter raised just for her. The porch air hit my face and felt cleaner than it had any right to, and the siren carried me toward a place where truth is written in light and shadow and does not ask permission to be believed. Behind us, the kitchen kept the dents that would later tell everything clearly. The ambulance rocked me through streets I had driven 100 times without noticing how long each light lingers, and the paramedic kept his hand near the rail as if steadiness could be borrowed. He asked me to rate pain, and I said numbers that sounded like weather alerts, and he nodded as if storms were expected this season. He took vitals, wrapped a cuff, checked pupils, and told me to stay with him, and I stayed because his voice spoke in measures that did not require proof. When we reached the ER, doors folded open, and the night became bright again, and somewhere behind us, the house kept its upstairs hush. Later, Leah told me she had called twice to the number listed as primary emergency contact, and no one answered, and then the neighbor left a message with my parents telling them which hospital had their daughter. The return call did not come. The triage nurse logged me under assault, probable fractures, concussion symptoms, and added family unavailable. A resident asked who could meet consent obligations if procedural sedation was needed, and I said my own name because I had learned to sign for myself. Time moved on 2 tracks, the one with machines and signatures, and the one that waited for footsteps that never entered the hall. I tried again, thumbed my phone until the cracks lined up like a map, and called the house. My mother answered in a whisper that fit a stairwell. "Do not make this worse," she said. "Your sister is shaken." I asked if she had heard where I was, and she said, "We will talk in the morning when feelings settle." My father took the phone and asked if police were involved and told me not to escalate family matters into legal ones, and when I said the neighbor had called an ambulance, he sighed as if that choice had inconvenienced his quiet evening. Leah watched the monitor, watched me, and wrote her name larger on the board again and asked without judgment whether I wanted hospital security notified. I said yes, and the word built a small wall where a door should have been. Minutes became hours, scans printed answers, and the chair from our kitchen lived inside my ribs like a word I could not swallow. I kept looking toward the entrance and found only strangers taking careful steps and people who had learned how to show up without a script. It was not neglect, it was allegiance. Leah stayed through the handoff at shift change, a constant steadiness in a room that had measured me into charts, and when she sat, she did not fill the air with questions that would turn pain into performance. She said this was not an accident and did not let the word linger like gossip. It was assault, she said, and hearing the right noun felt like a blanket pulled up to my collarbone. She asked if I had anyone outside the family who could stand beside me, and I scrolled through names that were mostly numbers until I stopped at one that carried a memory of control. Denise Calhoun. I said the attorney who helped me once when a landlord tried to keep my deposit. Leah nodded and passed me a charger and a cup of ice and told me she would be back after checking another patient. I called, and Denise answered on the second ring with a voice that made space for air. "Tell me what happened," she said, and I pressed the words into a straight line I could read back without breaking. Chair to the ribs, kicks to the side, head to the counter edge. Parents upstairs with the attacker neighbor called the ambulance hospital logged assault family, telling me not to involve police or escalate. Denise asked about injuries and records, and I told her the list the resident had recited and that X-rays do not argue, and she said good because facts are the quiet weapons that do not misfire. She told me to save everything: photos, messages, voicemails, call logs, and to move anything financial that tied me to the house into a folder. We would untie one knot at a time. She said she would come by in the afternoon and that we would start with a restraining order request as soon as I was stable enough to sign. Leah returned with a chair and placed it where I could see the door, then wrote hospital social work on the whiteboard under her name, and the words looked like a rope someone had thrown from shore. She showed me how to angle the phone to document bruises without shifting the ribs and where to find the discharge notes once the portal updated. She asked again if I wanted security notified of family members arriving, and I said yes because yes felt like a spine. The room became different with a plan in it. It held air better. Denise texted a list that began with evidence folder and ended with change emergency contact, and Leah underlined fluids and pain control on the chart and told me I was not alone in this room no matter what the staircase at home sounded like. The monitor beeped its stubborn metronome, and for the first time that night, the rhythm felt like something I could match. I named the folder Evidence because the word steadied my hands, then opened the camera and began turning pain into pictures that would not argue later. Leah showed me how to roll without shearing the ribs and how to brace the phone with the tray, and I took a sequence along my side where the skin had floured into purple and rust. The resident printed X-rays and slid them into a lighted box so I could photograph the fractures as clean white breaks against shadow, a language my family will not speak but must obey. I photographed the wristband with my name and date and the small tape at my temple where the counter split skin. I opened voicemail and saved my mother saying, "Do not make this worse. Your sister is fragile," and my father sighing about exaggeration in family matters. I forwarded both to Denise with the subject they said. Leah suggested screenshots of unanswered calls, so I captured the log showing my attempts stacked like steps toward a locked door. Then I scrolled months of messages where emergencies arrived on schedule. Rent this week, utilities overdue. Can you cover taxes until the lender posts? And I saved them beside the photos. I searched email for transfer confirmations and moved those two along with refinance documents where my signature held up a roof that never covered me. Denise texted that we would need a simple, factual narrative who did what, when, where, how injuries, medical care witnesses, and to keep opinion out because opinion is the fabric my parents wrap around hard things. I wrote that narrative in the Notes app, stuck to nouns and times and places, and added a line about Mrs. Bennett at the doorway calling for help. When Leah returned, she asked about cameras, and I remembered the Bennett's doorbell and the small dome at the intersection watching the light. She came back with Mrs. Bennett on speaker. The neighbor would pull whatever her device captured and said the lens might show Victoria pacing at the window while I lay on tile. Denise replied, "Good preserve without editing share copies. Only keep originals with the owner. We can subpoena if needed." I photographed the discharge instructions when they printed medications listed imaging, summarized follow-up scheduled, and added the billing page. Leah wrote security notified on the whiteboard and asked whether I wanted the hospital social worker to give resources for protective filings in case home tried to call itself mine again. I said yes to resources and filings and no to going back, and I saved that answer like a page I could open when the next request arrived dressed as family. Before midnight, Denise arrived with a tablet and had me airdrop the folder so she could mirror it, then photographed my screen to timestamp what we had. She dictated an affidavit while Leah adjusted the blanket and the resident checked pupils, and when we finished, the folder looked like a room with walls. In the hallway, a copier ran, and inside my chart, the words, "Adult Protective Considerations" were present. I closed my eyes and pictured a judge reading light and shadow instead of our last name, and let that thought hold me until the monitor and my breath agreed. The next afternoon, the door opened on a careful shuffle that once meant comfort and now meant rehearsal. My father entered first in pressed slacks, wearing the face he saves for verdicts. My mother followed with a paper bag that smelled like banana bread and apology. Victoria came last in oversized sunglasses, her mouth trained to tremble. None of them asked about breath or pain. My father cleared his throat, said everyone was upset, said I should not escalate the family into the system. My mother patted the bag and repeated, "Do not make this worse. Your sister is fragile." She said fragile the way some people say sacred. Victoria took off the glasses so tears could sit on her lashes without falling and said she was sorry I felt hurt. I told them the doctor had confirmed fractures and observation. My father said hospitals love labels and that I exaggerate where my sister is concerned. Leah stood by the board and watched the monitor. I reached for the folder, set it between us, and opened to the first image. Ribs became white lines no story could bend. "These are mine," I said, "here and here." My mother asked if we had to look at something so upsetting. "Yes," I said, "because upsetting things count whether we look or not." I played my mother's voicemail, then my father's, and let their voices occupy a room where machines keep time. Victoria said pressure made her break that I sound superior when I try to help, that she felt small and acted because of it. "Feeling small does not turn chairs into weapons," I said. My father told me to be reasonable and warned the community might hear. Leah said the neighbor had given a written statement. My mother's mouth closed on statement like it burned. Denise walked in, then calm and exact greeted the staff, said my name, and introduced herself to my parents. She placed a thin stack on the tray. "Notices of revocation and protection," she said. "Effective today. Natalie revokes any powers of attorney you claim dissolves participation in your mortgage arrangement upon filing and removes your access to her accounts records and medical decisions. She will also seek a restraining order against Victoria based on medical evidence, eyewitness accounts, and recorded messages." My mother asked how I could do this to family. I said family had done these things to me for years while calling it love. Victoria reached toward the bag as if bread proved care, then let her hand drop and said she was not herself that night. "Courts do not excuse violence under the banner of not yourself," Denise said. "Do you have documents for us to review?" My father began about sacrifice and investments. Denise said the only investments relevant were the ones in my bones and the ones recorded by imaging down the hall. Leah adjusted the oxygen line. The room decided which story would survive. My mother folded her hands and asked me to think of Christmas birthdays, the house the ways families bend. I said I was done bending until I broke. "I will not return until a court puts safety between me and the person who used a chair when a voice would have done." Victoria whispered that I was cruel. "Cruelty is kicking someone who cannot stand," I said. Denise asked them to sign to acknowledge receipt. My father refused. She noted refusal and handed copies to Leah for the chart. My mother reached for my hand. I moved it to the rail. I said I hoped one day they would stand where facts live. Tonight, facts are the only language I will hear. Victoria began to sob in practiced waves. No one applauded. Denise said we were done and further contact must go through counsel. "Security can be called if visitors become disruptive," she added. My father lifted his chin and said this would ruin us socially. "That is not our concern in this room," Denise said. My mother tried to leave the banana bread. "Take it," I told her, "because I do not eat what is offered to quiet me." They gathered at the door like actors waiting for a cue that would not come. Leah opened it and thanked them for visiting. When it closed, the room exhaled. I leaned back and let the ache be itself. The folder lay on the tray like a passport out of a country that never stamped my name. Denise sat and said we would file in the morning. I nodded and watched the lightbox dim and felt for the first time in years the floor choose me over the performance upstairs. Leah wrote her name larger on the board, and the monitor kept a steadier beat for me. The courthouse smelled like old paper and polished stone, the kind of place that trusts records more than rumors, and when Denise guided me through the checkpoint, she did not talk about hope, only about procedure. We filed the petition with exhibits numbered and clipped photographs of bruises, X-rays printed in soft gray, the discharge summary, the EMT narrative, the neighbor statement, the call logs, the voicemails, and a concise affidavit written like a police report, where feeling had been traded for time, location, act, injury treatment. The clerk stamped the first page, and time became ink. In the waiting hall, a bulletin board carried flyers for anger management and victim services, and it felt like the building itself had already chosen what story belonged here. Outside, my phone vibrated with a social media storm that did not need my name to point at me. My mother had posted a photo of hands folded in prayer and words about family betrayal, asking for strength during a difficult season. Comments gathered in neat lines, church friends promising grace and patience, and light cousins typing, "Stay strong, Eleanor," and not one asked who was bleeding. A few hours later, Victoria posted herself on a couch, wrapped in a blanket mug lifted like a chalice captioned "Healing After Emotional Abuse. Please send understanding." The thread filled with hearts. Denise read none of it. She reviewed the packet again, adjusted 2 commas, and underlined the line identifying me as the petitioner, seeking a protective order based on recent assault by a household member. She said we would let the courthouse speak in sentences that end with a period. When the bailiff opened the courtroom door, the air changed the way hospital doors change air, and we took seats close enough to hear without raising our chins. The judge entered, and the room stood, then sat, and the docket ran like a river that had carried many lives before mine. When our case was called, Denise rose and named me, then named the relief requested an order requiring Victoria to stay away from my person, my home, and my workplace with a minimum distance. No contact, direct or indirect, and compliance with any additional counseling deemed appropriate. The judge asked for the basis. Denise offered the record. She moved with the calm of a person who has learned that the truth can carry its own weight when given a handhold. She presented photographs taken within hours of the incident, imaging showing fractures of the right ribs, the notation of possible ulnar fracture, the EMT narrative describing the scene, the neighbor statement describing what she saw and heard, the voicemails urging me not to involve authorities, the call log showing unanswered attempts to reach my listed contacts. The judge took his time with the X-rays, holding each page to the light as if the bones could speak for themselves, and then he asked me to describe what happened in plain words. I kept to nouns and verbs and left adjectives in the hall. My sister lifted a wooden chair and struck my right side. She struck again. She kicked me while I was on the floor. I could not breathe normally. The neighbor called an ambulance. My parents did not assist me. The judge noted that I appeared credible, and he asked whether law enforcement had been contacted. Denise said not yet because hospital care came first, but that we were prepared to file a report if the court wished to coordinate with the local department. The judge nodded at the EMT narrative and the photographs and asked if there was any dispute about identity of the assailant. Victoria, seated between my parents, spoke then in a voice designed to collect sympathy. She said she was overwhelmed, that she was fragile, that she did not mean it, that I had provoked her by speaking to her like a patient and treating her feelings as a problem to fix. My father added that families have storms and that outsiders should not weaponize a bad night, and my mother said I had always been dramatic about my sister. Denise asked permission to play one voicemail. The judge agreed. My mother's words filled the room. "Do not make this worse. Your sister is fragile. Please do not exaggerate," and the line clicked into silence. The judge turned a page and looked at the photographs again. "This court does not excuse violence under the guise of fragility," he said, and the sentence landed like a weight that makes a table stop wobbling. He granted a temporary protective order on the record to be reduced to writing and served with a minimum distance of 200 feet. No contact in person or online surrender of any weapons if present, and enrollment in an anger management program as a condition of any future modification. He ordered Victoria to cover my out-of-pocket medical expenses documented by the hospital summary and allowed Denise to submit additional bills as they arrived. He addressed my parents not as defendants but as adults who had chosen to intervene in a way that discouraged aid, and he told them that discouraging a victim from seeking care or contact with authorities is not a kindness but a risk. He warned that any interference with the order would be considered a violation. He signed the order and the bailiff stamped the seal in ink turned into geometry around me. In the hall, Victoria cried in the practiced way that used to turn rooms, and my parents circled her with words about how unfair the world could be when it refuses to understand a sensitive heart. Denise guided me past them without stopping. She said we would deliver copies to hospital security, my employer, and the leasing office, and that we would begin formal steps to unwind my name from the mortgage and to end any powers of attorney they believed they still held. She said to change locks and passwords where needed, and to consider a post office box until the first months grew quiet. On the sidewalk, my phone kept vibrating. My mother had posted again a long paragraph about praying for a daughter lost to bitterness and the dangers of secular courts that do not see the truth of family. I did not answer the feed. The only audience that mattered had read the film. I breathed, counted 4 beats, and let law hold. After the order was served, the city felt different, not safer exactly, but legible, and legible was enough to begin. Denise filed notices to unwind my name from the mortgage, removed my details from the property tax account, and sent letters to the bank, sealing every back door my parents had left open. At work, the compliance officer added the order to my file. Security logged Victoria as barred from the building, and HR listed emergency contacts who actually answer. Leah walked me to the employee entrance on my first day back and pointed to the copy of the order tucked near the badge reader. "If she shows up, you will not be the one asked to explain," she said, and the sentence sat with me like a chair that would hold. Therapy began with a question I had avoided for years. What do you want from your life if approval is not on offer? I told Nora I wanted a front door no one could claim with a story, a bank account that did not leak a quiet morning that did not demand I apologize for surviving. We built small practices and stacked them like bricks. 4 slow breaths. 1 message, unanswered. 1 bill removed from my name, 1 hour spent on something that did not solve anyone else. The first violation arrived 2 weeks later, a shadow at the far edge of the hospital lobby and a voice asking to see me because she felt misunderstood. Security reached her before I did and walked her outside while the supervisor filmed the distance line with a phone. Denise filed the report, and the judge extended the order by another year. My parents called it cruelty and then posted about prayer. I called it consequence and then went to therapy. In the evenings, I sat at the table in my small apartment and sorted documents into keep and returned the mortgage papers, the escrow letters, the emails that said, "Can you handle?" and the receipts that proved I had. Denise sent the last confirmation from the county that my name had been removed from the house, and I watched a knot inside me loosen in a way I had not believed possible. I changed the locks on my own door, though no one else had a key changed the passwords I had once shared under the banner of family trust, changed the bank where I kept the accounts that paid for things that were mine. When the hospital social worker asked if I wanted to meet with a group for survivors of family violence, I said yes because saying yes to what helps is not the same as being used. The group met in a room with soft chairs and a window that looked at trees, and the first time I spoke, I said my name and the word assault, and did not apologize for either. Later, I wrote down a phrase Leah had used in the ER and sent it to Denise with a question about making something that could hold other people the way that night had held me. We called it quiet strength because I had spent years practicing quiet and was only now learning it could be strong. Leah found a community partner with a small hall on Tuesday nights. Denise filed the paperwork for a nonprofit, and I built a site that said, "We believe you," and meant it. The first meeting had 7 people and a plate of grocery store cookies and a rule that what is spoken here belongs to the person who said it. We talked about golden children and scapegoats and the way a house can feel like a stage where you never get a line, and someone cried in a way that sounded like breathing, finally getting a seat at the table. I brought copies of a simple evidence checklist because film wins where feelings are cross-examined, take photos, save messages, write a timeline, ask a neighbor to write what they saw, and I watched hands take the papers as if they were food. On the anniversary of the assault, I stood in my own kitchen with sunlight on the counter and a vase of tulips Leah had brought, and I touched the ridge near my temple and said, "I am still here," like a fact that does not need permission. My phone buzzed with a number I recognized and did not answer. Later, a letter arrived with a looping script that used words like family and forgiveness and seasons, and I placed it in the return pile because sometimes healing is the act of refusing to participate in a lie. In court, the restitution claim cleared, and a check arrived that covered the deductible and the days I missed at work. And though money does not stitch bone, it can remove a few stones from the backpack you have been told is yours to carry. The church where my parents had posted their prayers did not ask for my side, but gradually stopped amplifying theirs, and the neighbors waved at me a little longer when I walked home with groceries. On a Sunday afternoon, Leah spread a blanket in the park, and Denise brought a folder with the final letter from the clerk. All filings complete, all ties cut, and we sat without speaking, because not every good moment needs narrative. When the sun slid lower, I thought about the girl I used to be, who believed strong meant silent, and endurance meant love, and I let her rest. For the audience that will hear this story, I would say this. If they call you dramatic for speaking plain facts, collect the facts and let them speak for you. If they call you cruel for protecting your breath, know that oxygen has always been permission to continue. If they worship fragility while you bleed, step outside their sanctuary and find the room where evidence is allowed to testify. Family is not who shares your last name. It is who shows up under harsh lights and holds your hand while the images print. I no longer ask for approval from the room upstairs. The ER kept my pulse. The judge read the x-rays. I learned to speak in sentences that end with a period, and the life that followed learned how to listen.